Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Liz Fernandez with Professional People Training, and I just wanted to start the webinar out by letting everyone know we're going to have a great discussion this afternoon, and you can please feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question, or you can also place questions in the chat as we will be monitoring those throughout the time we're together today. So we have two people with us today, actually three. Sarah McReynolds is also here, who's hopefully going to have to moderate this session. Lisa Mosier is a state representative for District 106 in Kansas. And Lisa is a lifelong cattle producer, and politics were never on her radar. And we also have Brendan. Uh-oh, Brendan, I just lost your thing. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. Brendan Deppenbush, and he is a vice president of cattle feeding for Earsick and Doll Feed Services Incorporated. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. McReynolds.
Thank you so much, Liz. My name is Sarah McReynolds, and I serve as the Assistant Animal Health Commissioner for the Kansas Department of Agriculture. And some representatives from the Training and Exercise Plan with USDA reached out to us to try to set up a webinar, more of a discussion-based interactive webinar, where we would have industry stakeholders from Kansas who have been active participants in our foot and mouth disease exercise that we hold at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. So I'm honored to be able to introduce two of our stakeholders today. Unfortunately, Pat Meese with Tyson Foods was supposed to also be participating in this panel, and he was unable to make it due to a last-minute challenge. So first off, what we're going to do is Brandon Deppenbush is going to present on his perspective, and then we'll hand it over to Lisa Mosier, and then after that, we'll have some time for question and answer. So thank you very much, Brandon, and I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sarah McReynolds, for inviting me to participate this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, and Liz, for your work trying to get this all put together for us, so thank you for that. So yes, my name is Brandon Deppenbush. I work with Earsick and Doll Feed Services. We are a cattle feeding company, so we have 7 feed yard locations across the southwest quadrant of the state of Kansas. I've been in the cattle feeding industry for 15 years now. As far as the animal disease preparedness and then secure beef supply, I've been part of both of those efforts here for, I guess, probably going on 8 years, whether it be in working groups or advisory boards. So I know the topic today is foreign animal disease exercises that Dr. McReynolds and Dr. Smith put on. But for me, it's really hard to separate secure beef supply from those exercises that we do. It's when we do those annual exercises for the foreign animal disease exercises, it's really a good time for us to dust off our secure beef supply plan and then run them at the same time. So not only are we participating in the exercise run by the state, but we're also exercising our individual plan at the location. So before I really kind of maybe get into the specific involvement that I have is, like Liz said, feel free just to interrupt if you have any questions. Not going to be any PowerPoint slides. I'd rather it just to be a discussion between us, and hopefully there's a bunch of questions that come at the end. But I've been involved with the exercises, like I said, over multiple years, and I've been involved in really 2 different main areas. One as a field participant, and then the second way I've been involved is at the actual exercise itself at the Kansas Department of Ag. To give you kind of a brief background on how we participated at the field level or at the farm level or at the feed yard level, however you want to look at it, I just really want to highlight 3 different cases that we went through. The first one was maybe one of the more intense ones, and we picked our facility, our feed yard, as an active site. So we had a disease investigator come out and was investigating doing an investigation, going through all the steps that they would out in the field, as well as making communications back with the headquarters at the Kansas Department of Ag. And that was probably the most intense one that I've been a part of. I participated in other exercises where I was just available to answer phone calls. Phone calls would be such as, hey, we have a load of cattle coming out of Oklahoma or Mississippi. Would you be willing to accept them? Just part of the exercise and for them to gain feedback. The other way was a little bit maybe more fun, if you will, funner, is on my side is able to make calls into the phone bank there or into the animal health commissioner and request movement permits, all kinds of weird stuff to try to throw wrenches into their plan as they're walking through that exercise. But I've already touched on it once, but I certainly want to touch on it one more time. But some of the biggest value that we see or that I've seen personally is also exercising my local, at the farm level, secure beef supply plan at the same time as we exercise at other ones. Now, my key takeaways just from that participation, from the field participation, number one, and it should be no surprise, it's communication. The funny thing is, we had the veterinarian come out there to do the mock disease investigation. I'm in the front office of the building, just honestly get a little bit mad. It's like, where in the heck is she? She's supposed to be here. She's supposed to be here. Which they had already had her back in the back room, so she was already there, and I didn't even know it. But that was a very minor example. But I think deals like that, it really highlights the importance of communication when we get into those outbreaks. It's also, when we do those field exercises, there's a lot of questions being asked, what's going on? So it's a great opportunity to do internal training with our teams. What is foot and mouth disease, really a disease that we focus on the most. Talking about cleaning and disinfecting. If we see an animal in the chute that did have signs and symptoms, what would we do? Where would we put the animal? How would we clean it? What would it look like? How would we quarantine the animal? So things like that are some learnings that we were able to learn because we actually had the veterinarian right there practicing with us as we go along. It also allows us to discover our weaknesses in our secure beef supply plan as we walk through those steps and see what did work and what didn't. The other way that I participate in the exercises is as being an observer, at the Kansas Department of Ag. I've only been able to do that once. When I participated, I spent most of my time in the permitting room. And our room, if you will, is charged with making yes-no decisions on movement. Should we move or should we not? And then what routes would be acceptable for those permits. I can assure you it was a very lively conversation. We did have a Packer participant in the room, so it was very lively as we walked through those discussions, and I felt it was extremely valuable for me to see. We also participated in the briefings and updates. Several times throughout the day, we all got together as the whole exercise to go through different scenarios that had come up. The learnings and the takeaway specific to the permitting room would be is that permitting is going to be a real challenge, and there's going to need to be some technology solutions, I think, that will help us down the road. But in general, the overall exercise, I would say, is I was absolutely blown away by the realism of the exercise, how serious the staff took it. And I'll be honest with you, for those that are not necessarily in Kansas, it really, really makes me proud to be part of Kansas and associated with Kansas Department of Ag, and to be able to work with Dr. Smith and Dr. McReynolds, because they do a phenomenal job. And it really makes me proud to be in our industry and knowing that they have our backs. It's great to see the behind the scenes, how an exercise would work, all the communications and that type of stuff, the networking and discussions that we've had in the hall rooms with different people, whether it be federal, state, or industry, along these lines is very beneficial. As I wrap this thing up here, I want to talk about what value it had. Start with what value it had for me, and then what value I think these exercises have for the overall industry. But for me personally, within our company, it's time to reflect. It's really a time to slow down and think critically through the different what-if scenarios. It's hard to get, well, it is for me, maybe not for you all, but it's hard for me to get my mindset right to be in that mindset of a foreign animal disease. So once a year when we're able to go through these exercises, it allows us just to slow down and think more critically of that. It's to reset our preparedness mindset within the company here, that we need to be ready and be prepared. For the overall industry, why I think the industry participation in these animal or foreign animal disease exercises is important is, honestly, I don't think anybody would disagree, but at the industry level is where the rubber will hit the road should something like this happen. So involve the industry ahead of time for them to know what's going on, for them to maybe be able to come up with some solutions that maybe Dr. Sarah and others had not thought of, I think is very important. We try to look at everything on a return on investment. I don't know what the return on investment is going to be for the industry involvement, but I think it'll be fully recognized should we ever have a disease outbreak, because I think at that point in time, industry and government will be walking together, and there will be limited surprises. There will still be surprises that come up. But from an industry standpoint, we're on offense. Again, I'm so proud to be part of Kansas and Kansas Department of Ag. They are truly on offense leading this mission. The last thing that I would say here, when I talk about this topic, is I feel very strongly about this, but none of us are safe until all of us are safe. So it's great that Kansas is doing this. It's great that other states on the call that I know are doing it, but none of us are safe until all of us are safe. None of us are prepared till all of us are prepared. How do we broaden this out into more of a regional and maybe even a national effort and involve industry in that process? So, Liz, I might have exceeded my time limit, but I'm willing to take any questions now or afterward. But thank you, Dr. Reynolds and Liz.
No, that was really great. Sarah, do we want to wait for questions until the end, or?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Let's wait for questions, and I'll go ahead and pass it off to Lisa Mosier. Both of these representatives today, and I'm sure it's not surprising since Kansas is a beef state, they're both representing the beef industry, but they come from two different perspectives. So you just heard from Brandon on the feedlot industry, and now I get to hand it off to Lisa Mosier, and she has a very different role. She's a lifelong cattle producer, owns and operates a purebred and commercial cow-calf operation, and then also serves as a state representative. So it'll be a different perspective, and I really thank Lisa for also sharing hers this afternoon.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Liz, for organizing this. I apologize that my screen is frozen, and if that's going to be a bother, I can just take my frozen picture off of there and you can just listen. So let me know, Sarah or Liz, if that becomes a problem during this presentation.
I think you're fine. No, I think you're fine, Lisa. It's a nice picture.
It's just what the camera caught when I turned on the camera. So
it's a good.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Liz said, I am a lifelong cattle producer, and politics was never on my radar. I was born and raised on a general crop and livestock farm that my great-grandparents homesteaded in 1877. When I was a young girl, I was a tomboy, and I grew up with 6 siblings. And after dinner, I would run out the back door, and my 2 older sisters would say, "Get in here and help with dishes." But I wanted to go out and be with Dad. I loved all things livestock since I can remember. And my dad was also my greatest cheerleader when I went to K-State in the late 70s. Graduated in December of 81 with a degree in animal science in the production option in the College of Agriculture. January of 82, I married my husband, Harry, and we have been able to spend the last 42 years together raising better beef. We started off in North Dakota with his folks for 4 years. And in March of 1986, we had an opportunity to move to Kansas, about an hour from where I grew up. So we packed up our Simmental cows, our horses, and our 2-year-old son, Cameron, and we set out on a journey that changed our life's trajectory forever in a very positive way. After 8 years of managing that ranch and continuing our own independent cattle operation, in February of 1994, we took another leap of faith and moved to a ranch here at Wheaton, Kansas, and we have just celebrated 30 years as a ranching family here in Marshall County. Harry and myself and our son Cameron and his wife Carrie own and operate Mosier Ranch LLC, which Sarah said is a purebred and commercial cow-calf operation. We're located about 40 miles northeast of Manhattan. So I'm telling you this backstory so that as I move forward, the intersection of my life with legislature and now the foreign animal disease exercise, it's all quite interesting. And for 42 years, our ultimate focus has been the steak or the hamburger on your plate. Other traits are very important in the beef industry, but consumer acceptance is what keeps us in business. We'll host our 33rd bull sale this fall. In the middle of that 33 years, we would sell about 140 bulls a year. And 10 or 12 years ago, our three grown children said, "We really don't want to do the purebred thing, Mom and Dad." And we are so good with that. I mean, they're all doing their own things and enjoying. Cameron loves feeding cattle and the commercial business, but not the purebred. And so the last 10 years or so, Harry and I have been slowing down. And in the process of that, we were looking for niche markets because we had spent our entire career focusing on quality beef. In 2017 through the end of 2020, we worked with a niche market out of Lawrence, Kansas called Meat LLC, and they would buy a trailer load at a time throughout the year. Since 2021, we have been working with Kansas Premium Meats out of Bellevue, Kansas, which is a small family-owned meat store, and we are their sole provider for grain-finished beef. And since we had more cattle than what those opportunities presented to us, we had worked with IMI Global, and we are an age and source verified product. And so in 2023 and 2024, we have sent pot loads of finished cattle to their plant that they work with in Omaha. And that beef goes to China and Saudi Arabia. So, we've been working really hard all our lives on producing a great product. Our three kids are all married. They've given us 11 grandchildren, which takes up a good part of our life and a great part of our life, actually. Our involvement in the beef industry over the years, my husband has been heavily involved in the American Simmental Association. We've been involved in Kansas Simmental, the American Angus, the Beef Improvement Federation. We were beef leaders in 4-H. I was fortunate to serve 6 years in the Livestock and Meat Industry Council, is a nonprofit group that works with the Animal Science Department at K-State. And so you might be asking, what does all of this have to do with, why did I mention politics in the opening statement? There was a vital piece of pro-life legislation that was making its way through the Kansas legislature in 2020. And after having key conversations with Republican leaders and, of course, my family, my husband, I was encouraged to announce my candidacy for the House of Representatives. So I did that on March 25th, 2020, right during COVID. I ran on the following mantra: pro-life, pro-ag, pro-Kansas. I got into the legislature because of my pro-life stance, and then realized that with my lifetime in agriculture that I might possibly be able to, to advocate for good agricultural legislation in the House. So let's see, my notes are kind of a mess here. So I started in January of 2021, and I represent 4 rural counties in Kansas. It's called District 106. It's the counties of Marshall, Washington, Republic, and Jewell. and they're all up along the Nebraska border. Again, it's a very rural area, and my focus has been on, you know, good ag legislation, good pro-life legislation. I serve currently as vice chair of the Ag Committee in the House. I'm also on the Ag and Natural Resources Budget Committee, and also on Federal and State Affairs. Some significant ag legislation that I've helped with during the last 4 years is fake meat labeling, brand application and renewals through the Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Farm Animal and Field Crop and Research Facilities Protection Act, which we just got that passed this past session, and it has been signed into law, and also amending the Kansas pesticide law. So, so now we're going to put the beef and the legislature together. I don't know how many of you remember where you were on December 23rd, 2003. I was at the Kirkwood Mall in Bismarck, North Dakota, doing some last minute Christmas shopping when I heard about the BSE outbreak. And so truly since that time, my husband and I and our family, you know, it's on our radar about, you know, what could happen and how could we be prepared for, you know, an incident of that magnitude. So my first experience with any sort of direct action to mitigate a concern like that came back in November of 2022 in Topeka, when I was invited to attend the National Incident Management System overview. And that was a day-long session that the Kansas Department of Agriculture provided. And I learned more acronyms that day than I have ever learned in my life. The IAP, Incident Action Plan, EOC, Emergency Operations Centers, PIO, Public Information Officers, ICS, Incident Command System, the MAC, Multi-Agency Coordination Groups, Unified Command, and a whole myriad of, you know, a 30,000 foot view of what all of those different groups do. I also was introduced to the Fusion Center here in Kansas that day, and I've been trying to get a tour set up with Ingrid Trevino Garrison, but the couple times that we had it on the schedule, something came up and I wasn't able to do that. And so then my next experience was December 12th through the 14th of 2022, when I was able to actually sit in and observe the FAD exercise that the KDA sponsored. I was totally overwhelmed at first. There were so many different divisions, and you know, the people in charge had their vests on, and they would go to their groups. And I'm going to just go through my notes, because from the 2 years I've been able to attend, because that will kind of, I hope, give you a picture of what all the different things involved in those exercises and what ultimately comes out of them. So the operations has to do with the animals, the cases, the cleanup, movement, like Brendan said, the permits, surveillance of affected areas and potential affected areas. The Highway Patrol had a table there that day. Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. There was another section for purchasing and finance, because anyone that requested any supplies, you know, they had to know how much they were going to cost, and the purchasing and finance department was in charge of saying, yes, we can get you this, or you've got to come up with another alternative. The National Guard had a presence there. Logistics was one of the most interesting groups that I watched. You know, it was like they were in charge of getting the materials for, you know, the cleanup to a specific site, or moving supplies, you know, and just everything from getting caterpillars to you know, bury carcasses, or you know, whatever kind of plastics were needed or anything. I mean, they took care of any supplies that moved anywhere. The command staff, which consists of Secretary Beam and Dr. Smith, were in a room where they were constantly in touch with all these other segments. And it was just amazing to watch. And so I started thinking, you know, as I started thinking as a rancher and as a legislator, you know, from the rancher side, it's like, you know, what can I do to keep my little piece of the world safe? And how can I talk to other people about doing the same, much like Brendan had said earlier. But then it was like, how can I work to keep the public informed? You know, could I be a liaison between what goes on at the KDA and what, you know, and the news that the legislature is receiving? Our state leadership is not directly involved in agriculture, and so if they could use a person to, you know, give updates from the rancher's perspective, I think that would be a valuable tool at some point. They talked about the triggers that would actually activate KDA to start their incident management team. And that, you know, something has to happen to activate. And then the teams analyze, establish, develop, prepare, and execute the action plan. There are tactic meetings, there were planning meetings, there were incident action meetings. There was a case manager assigned to each infected premise. And then there's the indemnity process. Are these people going to be reimbursed for their losses? And another thing that Brandon mentioned was effective communication, both internally between all of these different groups, and also from a public standpoint. You know, social media can be a really bad deal during something like this, and so the public information officer was very professional about getting out the you know, updates as things happened. So that and at the end of the 3-day session, they had what they called a final hot wash. At the end of every day, they would have a hot wash where every committee that I mentioned would say, you know, this went well, we could use improvement in this area, those kind of things. And so that was very valuable at the end of every day. They were talking about working timelines and trying to get things on a more realistic timeline level, having a resource packet, having, if we need firearm purchases, all the Joint Information Command, you know, talked about the phone bank and, you know, who's going to coordinate the phone bank and who's going to work those phones when there's 100 producers calling in wanting information. They utilized during the 2022 exercise, they utilized the Kansas Pork Producers Association, the Kansas Livestock Association, Kansas Dairy, all came in to the information officer committee to be able to help share the information as it was coming out. So then in the summer, last summer, I attended a virtual animal disease response, again, sponsored by the KDA. And that talked about, you know, stop movement of livestock, border checkpoints, the permit requirements that would allow continuity of business, which I believe a lot of all of the permits that are validated, I believe a lot of them are in the feedlot area because those cattle are in their ultimate, you know, phase before they go to harvest. And so it's important that feed yards be able to continue to be able to conduct business, and also increasing traceability with our business, and the traceability and the age and source. It's very important to us to know that those diseases can be traced here or there. Let's see. Then we went, then I'll go on to last December's meeting. There were some concerns after specific news releases. People in Kansas were wondering if MBAF was doing all the testing or if it was still going to Plum Island. And they wanted stop movement defined. What exactly does that mean? I couldn't move cattle from one of my pastures to a different pasture. That's what the stop movement was. I mean, that's what it, when you nail it, when you drill down and get to the bottom of it, you have to honor that, because that's what stop movement means. People were also asking, are horses susceptible to this? And so the general public was asking these things and, wanting answers. And so the cross species working groups were pointing people to fmdinfo.org, which is a website to go to answer some of those basic questions. It was just mentioned that, there's an entire team in these industry meetings. And the main goal for all of us are to keep the consumers informed with hard facts and not create any hysteria or anything along those lines. One thing I got to do in 23, which I knew that the situation had to come from somewhere, the situation that KDA was going to address. And they kept talking about SimCell. Well, the simulation cell is the company that makes up this disease, and here and there and wherever it goes. I was able to go into their private room and observe. And one of my notes was, the SimCell is fun to watch and would be even more fun to participate in. So hopefully this next year, I can do a little bit of what Brandon has done in the past, and that's answer phones or call in with certain questions, or those kind of things. So that's kind of my take on, the last 2 years of being able to participate in an FAD exercise. It was very, very enlightening, very eye-opening. Again, I'll echo what Brandon said. The KDA was very professional in all the different segments that work together, and all the other entities that came, from the outside of KDA. I feel like, Kansas is a leader in going through this in the most realistic way possible, short of actually having to do it. And so I feel privileged to have been a part of it from a producer standpoint and from a legislative standpoint. I don't know if it'll ever come to pass or not, but I would truly value being able to keep my legislative colleagues informed if a situation like this ever does come to pass. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have one question in the chat so far, so either you can raise your hand and ask a question and unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. So let me read the first question. It says, how does Kansas Ag identify the industry participants to take part in or observe exercises?
Liz, I can probably take that one on behalf of Kansas Department of Agriculture. When we are doing stakeholder meetings, we will always mention our annual foot and mouth disease exercise and tell the industry to reach out to us if they're interested in participating. We also send out, Kelly Oliver in our office, who is our animal health planner, sends out interest and emails to our secure beef supply participants, our secure pork supply participants, and our secure milk supply participants every single year to do if they're willing to participate and do exactly what Brandon did, give them the opportunity to stand up their plans. So those are the two main mechanisms that we reach out to the industry, but we welcome any industry participant. We've had all different types of industries, even zoos who've participated, small ruminant producers. So any type of industry participant who wants to take part, we'll try to figure out a way to include them in the exercise.
Any other questions, comments?
Liz, we have 147 people on, so hopefully we can get at least 20 questions here or something.
We actually had more. We had 160 at one point. So there's another question that just the chat. It said, in your experience, what are some recommended methods or practices that state and federal regulatory agencies can use to get the most participation from industry in these FAD exercises?
Well, I can take a shot and then Dr. McReynolds can clean it up, but what are the recommended methods or practices? I think Sarah's already lined them out. I mean, just asking the industry partners to participate, because I think there's a lot of industry partners that would want to participate. It's just a matter of reaching out to do it. Now, it's one thing for Sarah to call me, who I'm familiar with. It'd be quite another if somebody from an outside agency or USDA, somebody you don't have a personal relationship with, calls you. So I think lean on those personal relationships or others that do. I think that's how that, at least that's for me, that's how that trust has been built.
I believe my invitation came because you invited all the legislators. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yes. Yeah. Our Secretary of Ag invites all the legislators every year.
Mm-hmm. And, like, I'll echo what Brandon said again, as far as, reaching out to industry groups and having them put it on their website or send out a mailer that, KDA is going to do this. And then any interested individuals from, the Pork Association or, poultry, anything would be notified about it.
We do have a great comment in the chat. It says, one of the goals of CDFA CARES in California is to encourage local government emergency management to adopt the whole community approach. Using a whole community approach and integrated preparedness planning leverages the knowledge and experiences of all entities in the community, including livestock producers from the respective jurisdictions, from protecting against, preparing for, responding to, and recovering from emergencies by organizing and strengthening the jurisdictional assets, capacities, and capabilities to effectively respond to emergency or disaster. Thanks for your presentation. Great comment.
So, question for you, Sarah. Are the emergency management folks from each county invited to this?
Yeah, so we do. Again, it's if they want to participate, they reach out, especially if we have a producer who's participating in their county, we'll reach out and to see if they'd like to play as well, and try to involve them that way. So we leave it up to county emergency management.
Okay.
Another question just came through the chat, and I know you've been hosting this exercise for a long time. How has participation changed over the years, and do you feature certain groups every year?
It has changed a little bit over the years. Some of it is just on who reaches out and says they'd like to play that year, and we adapt it to that industry or that group. I know when we had a zoos that wanted to participate, then we made sure to tie them in. One time we had a veterinary clinic that wanted to participate. So each year it's more of adapting it to the industry that's engaged and wants to participate. We certainly try to have a focus. One year we focus more on vaccine deployment, different type of focuses overall in the exercise, but we do not turn down any industry participations. We just try to adapt a little bit as they are planning the exercise to make it work. So that industry gets a good idea of what it would look like for them in an outbreak.
The next question is, what are the biggest challenges in organizing/hosting a large-scale exercise versus, say, a contained, specific, smaller tabletop?
Well, I'm probably not going to be the best person to answer this. There's others in Kansas Department of Ag who can answer this much better than I, but I think for the biggest part, it's logistics. It is very challenging to pull this together, get all those engaged, figure out how to, when Brandon talked about making those phone calls and trying to make it as realistic as possible, trying to let the industry have a real feel of what it looks like. It is logistically challenging for our emergency management staff. So the smaller tabletop is a lot easier, doesn't take near the amount of time and prep work. We'll start planning 6 months in advance or earlier in order to do one of these exercises every year.
We have another question. It says, can you articulate how the land grant university is tapped to provide expertise that can initial connections to the day of? I think I just messed that up. Let's try that again. Can you articulate how the land grant university is tapped to provide expertise that can be found in other states?
Yeah, certainly. So we do lean heavily on our land grant, Kansas State, to help fill our incident management team. And also through extension. I mean, we lean heavily on them in an outbreak response and try to engage them. So yeah, using our land grant, there's a lot of expertise there. There's a lot of individuals who know agriculture that we lean on and help with our incident management team.
And there's a question for Brandon. What do you estimate time-wise for your participation in exercises from initial connections to the day of?
Yep. I would say that from the initial standpoint, maybe a couple hours at most, just visiting with Kansas Department of Ag. They try to do a pretty good job of not telling you exactly what's going to happen, so it does make it a little bit more real. But there is a little bit of setup time, just kind of generally talk through. And on the day of, they want to make sure, especially if you're going to be participating on phone, to make sure that you kind of set up hours at which you can be available to take a call or make a call. But more specifically on the day of, in the past, tried to really rely on that whole day mostly to be on and off on the project. It obviously depends on how in-depth we are, if we actually have active investigations or whatever going on at the farm. But the second, I see you asked a question, so from a secure beef supply plan, we kind of reserve that day as well, just to spend time walking through our plans and revising those and talking about lines of separation and that type of stuff. So there's no specific requirement. It's just what you want to put into it is what you'll get out.
Hello?
You go ahead, Margot.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have a question? No. Okay, we have another question. Can Sarah and Brandon share a bit more about the time investment for an FADD drill?
Yeah, I can start, and then Dr. McReynolds can close again. Again, I think I kind of addressed it just previously, but share a bit more about the time investment. You know, when on the day of, like when I went up to Manhattan and participated, and it was a full day process, right? And we got started, and you guys would even got started the day before. Some of the staff would have been the evening before get going, but the exercise itself would last that pretty much a full working day, and it was pretty busy. So I hope that helps. Sarah, what did I leave out?
Yeah, Right, and I'm not sure if this answers it, but certainly we try to make it as real as possible. So when Brandon's participating, we have our exercise organizers work with him, and he will make that initial call to the Kansas Department of Agriculture or the field veterinarian with his concerns. And then we have the travel time in there. So that's time that we're participating that's not on the producer, making it as real as possible. And then we go out there and actually look at an animal, collect samples or go through the process, explain the process of collecting samples. And then we work through the producer also filling out a epi survey, just like we would in real life. So there is a little bit of time commitment based on how much time they have, but we do try to make it as realistic as possible.
We have a couple more questions. What actions have the industry folks taken as a result of their involvement in the exercises, and did they change what they would do?
Well, I can start if Lisa wants to add to it. But what actions? I mean, the biggest action is just how we're going to communicate internally, how we're going to go through it. You know, we haven't actually had to practice those actions, thank goodness, so we haven't had a disease outbreak. But it has forced us to think about what we would do should that happen. Again, like I said, if an animal come through the chute and had those signs and symptoms of FMD, you know exactly what are we going to do? Who are we going to talk to? What are we going to do with that animal? Where are we going to put it? And then the communication to our consulting vet and then to KDA and all that. So I think the biggest action that it's done is just puts us in a preparedness mindset.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And Mosier Ranch is in the process of securing its secure beef supply validation. I think I'm about halfway done with the forms. But yeah, just, you know, being prepared is the key element.
Here's another question or comment too. Great presentation, Brandon and Lisa. Do either of you feel that through participation in these exercises, you have gained a better perspective of the different industries within the state of Kansas and even regions of the state, such as what may be more pertinent to the Flint Hills and stocker industry versus Western Kansas and large feedlot or dairy industry?
Oh, I absolutely have a greater appreciation for agriculture in all parts of Kansas. And that's one thing that I tell my urban colleagues at the Capitol. It's like agriculture is not the same in Northeast Kansas as it is in Southwest Kansas or North Central Kansas. There are different strengths and weaknesses in every part of the state. And, you know, just recognizing that, I think is very important.
I think the perspective that I and our companies have gained the most is just the relationship with the packers and how they are going to react in a situation like this. And that's why I enjoyed so much being in the same room with the packer when we're going through that permitting process to get through some pretty lively conversations what that'll look like. So the perspective that I gain is probably more specific to the packing side of the industry.
Okay, the next question is, how do you engage the most resistant stakeholders? It seems like industry associations are often on board, but trying to engage smaller farmers is challenging. What strategies have been successful to engage hobby farmers or folks that are less connected to commercial production or industry associations?
That's a great question, Dr. Idle, and we certainly don't have the answer. I think a lot of it is if they're willing to participate, even in a small role, is showing how the response, how the disease is going to impact them, because it's going to affect our small producers certainly just as much as our large producers. So trying to build that, but it's a challenge certainly in Kansas too, trying to get our smaller producers, some of them that have played or participated in the exercise have been a tie through a veterinarian or a veterinarian clinic. And so we've kind of used that as an inroad, but we certainly haven't cracked or figured that out yet for reaching all those smaller producers.
I think when the opportunity presents itself, just to have a factual conversation about it. No pressure with, oh, you should be doing this, or you really need to do that. Just talk about, you know, the facts as they revolve around what a disease outbreak would require.
We do have one more question. It says, how much and what type of education outreach on FMD is conducted prior to the exercise with the different industries, as participants may have various amounts of knowledge?
I can start off, and then certainly maybe Lisa and Brandon, if they've had talk about what was provided, but that's a challenge that we always have. We provide, there are webinars, there's a lot out there. Dr. Bickett-Weddle has done some for us prior to an exercise, and trying to get everybody to watch a webinar to try to get some basic background for the diseases such as foot and mouth disease. Because we know people have different perspectives, and we don't want people to feel like they can't participate because they don't know that much about it. So we have tried to utilize webinars that have already been done and share those out, or if we need to, try to see if we can do a quick webinar and record it to try to get people closer to the same page.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? I actually got to be part of one of the exercises in Kansas many, many, many years ago. And they gave me the job of being an observer. And I had to sit in the room and I couldn't talk. I said, I never want to do that again. I was like, you picked the wrong person. I was like, what happens if I start talking? But I was really amazed at how many people came together for that exercise. It was really fascinating. When there was just a hole there, staff is there. That's how long ago it was. So
I think that was my job description too. I wasn't supposed to talk, so I think I might have broke the rules. So I guess I could confess now, Dr. McReynolds.
Very good.
Just out of curiosity, anybody on the call, I mean, Sarah, whoever, how many states do something that's kind of similar to what you do here in Kansas? Or anybody out there?
That's a great question. Helen Jones, you raised your hand. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, so I have a bit of a unique position. I'm a veterinary public health resident with the Ohio State University, and part of my residency is working with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, specifically in their emergency management response activities. So this was a very interesting webinar, and I thank you all. We are currently trying to do something similar with our FMD response and preparedness in terms of industry. So last year in December, we hosted a foot and mouth disease seminar to chat with industry representatives about what they see as their most, their areas of concern and areas they would like to learn more about. And we're hoping this summer to implement a foot and mouth disease tabletop exercise that my fellow resident put together at the end of her residency. And we've also been involved in some African swine fever preparedness workshops as well. But this webinar was super interesting and very helpful as we move forward with our foot and mouth disease activities.
Great. Thanks very much. Okay. And we have a comment. Big thanks to KDA and Kelly Oliver for working with NMPF to pilot test the farm biosecurity database for SMS. Your input was critical to refining it. having your yearly exercise made it easier for industry partnerships.